differently. So get used to it. Don't take it personally.
Like the kid in the back of the class who thought the teacher's full of shit and these other smartasses don't know what they're talking about. He's drawing some wild little cartoon, you know, mocking it all.
If he'd go out shopping or something, he'd leave me a little note to let me know where he was. I went for a walk. He's lying in a puddle of blood.
He is doing really what editorial cartoonists are meant to do. This guy has balls.
I think it's the responsibility of every artist to reflect the times in which they live. That's why Mr. Fish's work is really important.
It's not a dying profession. It is a profession that is being systematically murdered.
What editors like are funny little jokes that offend no one.
He doesn't play the way you play if you want to be rewarded.
I get a little squeamish when the audience treats cartoons as something quaint, as something cute. I want cartooning to be dangerous, and I want it to be something more than just ink on paper.
Welcome, everyone, and happy Saturday. It is Saturday morning here for me in Oakland, California, and it is May 1st. That is the sound. So that clip was from our guest today, Dwayne "Mr. Fish" Booth, and we're going to talk about art. Art as a weapon, art as influence. I'm going to talk about it all. And we have the Saturday crew. So first, let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert.
What's going on, Comrade Jason? Happy May Day to you. Very important day. The Internationale.
I figured out how to do that today. I just want you to know that. And coming all the way live from Maine, you may know him as Maine's lone black man. We know him as Marcus from the Left Flank Vets. Good morning.
What's up? What's up? What's up? How we doing, y'all? Happy May Day.
And coming at us live from the East Coast. I'm very excited about this show. We've been emailing back and forth. I've been a fan of this man's work for some time. Dwayne "Mr. Fish" Booth.
Where's my music?
Oh, sorry.
Very nice.
So I can't hear it actually, so I'm hoping that it's loud enough on the
Oh, it was loud.
It's perfect.
You know who I got that from? Adolph Reed emailed Pascal and I earlier.
10 different versions of the International. 5 different languages.
So coming in a little later is he's filling in for Paul Prescott, who unfortunately could not be here today. He's doing some May Day shit in Philadelphia. He's speaking at an outdoor conference. It is socially distanced. Karthik.
Hey, how are you? How's everyone?
Brown brother from another mother. What's going on, man?
Not that great, actually, because my dad apparently has tested positive for COVID, despite the fact that he got vaccinated with the AstraZeneca, the 65% efficiency one. So we're just bracing for that. My sister too. She's not vaccinated. She's my little sister. She's 25. So we're just waiting to see how that turns out. But so far they're just like they're hanging tight and they're doing all right for now. So let's see how
India?
that goes.
This is in India?
Yeah, this is in Chennai, in India. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. COVID is on fleek out there, man.
Do you feel like a quick question before we get into the real talk? So I know a lot of other countries got AstraZeneca and Johnson and Johnson. Do you feel like places like India kind of got the worst of the batch?
I was just talking about that with my parents, and like my sister was like, don't get into conspiracy theories and stuff. But I was just like asking myself, like, the AstraZeneca ones are the 65% efficiency ones, and it's strange that like that became the pretty much like the standard vaccine that got administered. So it's like you get it, but it'll be mild. So it's like, yeah, it's gonna suck for you, but at least you won't die or anything. Like, so touch wood. So
Jesus, that's well. We wish your parents a healthy recovery, and that hopefully they have a mild symptoms and everything works out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. And that's someone was commenting that was basically what, like, they're not even letting India make the stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's kind of the fucked up part. It's not even like, yeah, the raw materials are the problem, and I think the United States is still not. I'm not sure what the decision is now, but I hear that they sent some vaccines, but I'm not sure if they did anything about the raw materials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was hearing too. Well, I wanted to read something from the beginning of the book here that our friend Dwayne wrote, and I want to get his take, and then I want to get your guys' take on this. That said, it is my guess that the overwhelming majority of those who self-identify for reasons of conceit as left-leaning will also classify themselves as being activists after liking an Instagram post that says, "My pussy has teeth," or "If God hates gays, why are we so cute?" or "This pizza was brought to you by immigrants." These are the same people who are environmentalists because they scissor up their plastic six-pack rings before sending them out into the ocean, or they use reusable shopping bags when they drive factory farm food home in their SUVs. They are the same people who, from the right, would be pro-Americans because they are uncomfortable around Hispanic people, and patriots because they are vigorously uncrucial of any war crime perpetrated by any soldier, sailor, or politician, claiming blind allegiance to a thin, wind-blown banner composed of slick red and white racing stripes and a rectangle that looks like outer space. Regardless of which political wing we seek shelter beneath, our virtue is almost always conceptual and seldom experiential, making our moral convictions largely expressions of fandom meant to signal to other people which team we root for from the sidelines and nothing else.
Wow. That's
I like it. I like the cynicism. I like it.
That's an example of when my wife is just like, "Can you shorten your sentences?"
Yeah, I felt like that. I really appreciated the amount of stuff you managed to put into one sentence. Like, genuinely, that's something that I appreciate as a feat. A lot of people are not, writers are notoriously not cool with long sentences. But as someone who writes poetry, I like completing things in one thought, and that was a fantastic thought that you expressed right there.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Look, I highlighted a few different parts of the book, but that was one thing I wanted to get out, because there's one thing that Pascal often says, and I want to get Fish's take on this. Pascal says with his very cynical face and voice, "We don't have a left in this country. We just have a bunch of leftists."
Yeah. It was really important for me to start that at the very beginning of the book, because I feel like so many people self-identify as being radicals without demonstrating any radical nature whatsoever. And so it's a matter of figuring out what costume they're wearing and then calling them out on it, because it's satisfying. People want to identify themselves as being on the right side of issues with minimal exertion on their part, as far as I can tell. Because I think, and we can get into this a little bit later, I think that the way the culture is structured now, there's fewer and fewer places wherein anybody can exercise any real progressive voice at all, right? I mean, am I wrong about that?
No, I agree. I agree. Pascal, do you want to say something?
Mr. Fish, I want to ask, do you think that that's actually a product of the left being in the belly of the imperialist core capitalist beast of America? In other words, I think we would all agree that in the 30s and 40s, early 20th century, maybe late 19th century, we had a serious left that was such a threat to bourgeois capital that massive concessions had to be given vis-a-vis the New Deal.
Right.
And labor, the 5-day work week, weekends, except 8-hour work day, etc.
Yeah.
But do you think that in the post-war era of the liberal democratic expanse, where America kind of became the global hegemon, that the idea of producing a real left of that sort is kind of obsolete?
Yeah, because I think that what happened after the Second World War in particular was the coalescence of power to just the upper echelons of the hierarchy, which has a right wing and a left wing, but it's still part of the elite. And so how do you get people to refrain from attacking the upper echelon of the hierarchy and attack the elite? Is to say, you are part of my team, right? If you're a left Democrat, all of a sudden, being left remarkably became you belong to the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
And so it relinquishes any responsibility that you have to be uncomfortable, which is what activism is about, and what naming what is criminal about the system is about, because there's penalties for that. Right? And people don't want to be made uncomfortable, particularly after the Second World War, when the entire planet was almost destroyed. And I think that it's a key thing to also recognize, and a lot of what the book is about, is what happened to the voice of that population that came out of after the Second World War, where parents and younger people basically well, let me say it this way. I think the circumstances of the Second World War were the result of people playing follow the leader, and assuming that the people who were in charge had their best interests at heart. Right. So when it's demonstrated that that is not the case, you come out of that situation. It becomes an existential anxiety that you have to examine. And what do you use to examine in a very honest and truthful way? You utilize poetry, you utilize the arts community, because the arts community is there to communicate concerns while elbowing out of the way bullshit. And power and politicians rely on bullshit and what that does as far as shutting down communication. Right. So now you've got this population that is used to a degree in having their voices at least heard, because people wanted to communicate in private spaces and also in spaces where congregation was allowed to happen, say around newsstands, for example. Remember, we're talking about a time when the majority of the news was being there was the dominant culture had mainstream news sources, obviously, but there were any number of alternative news sources and various organizations that were attempting to name the problems of power. You know, the Communist Party had a voice. It was accessible by the general public, because we're talking about newsstands that produced information with a morning edition and a night edition. And so workers were accessing newsstands that had these publications next to each other. So you had more of an opportunity to get a wider range of opinion. And inside of that opinion were voices that weren't being sanctioned by power, that were self-generating and supporting themselves with subscription money and just donations.
Wow. Well, I mean, I would argue that possibly with the evisceration of print media, consolidation of telecommunications, that kind of ideological diversity in print publication is pretty much kind of evaporated. So
completely.
With that being the case, how does that affect? Well, I want to ask you a larger question, is that the argument that culture and art are tools for revolutionary change is something that we hear, particularly in kind of left Marxist circles, Castro, Amilcar Cabral, even Mao, the Cultural Revolution. It's kind of a part of the overall ethos of the left. I've always wondered the kind of culture as revolution and art as revolution within the American kind of last 50 years, how in a capitalist society that comes in at such an early stage of production, is the capacity of culture and art to be revolutionary really still possible? Particularly, I think of people when my generation, the early hip-hop generation, talking about hip-hop is the vanguard of the revolution for Black youth. And I always thought that was kind of crap because, quite frankly, hip-hop from its earliest production interfaces with capitalist mechanisms. So I'd like to hear from you as an artist who tries to create radical art. How do you get through that conundrum, or do you think it's something that makes it almost difficult for art and or cultural production to be radical revolutionary?
Yeah, you absolutely nailed it, because that is particularly when you look at how, 5 mega corporations that control all of the platforms from which information flows in this country. Where 25 years ago, it was maybe 53 corporations. And that's just, we're talking about the corporate model. Add to that, as I was just saying, private platforms that don't even fit into the discussion. There were lots. But it's true that now it's impossible, just for myself, for the last 10 years. Before that, there was still some version of an alternative press limping along, for sure, but people were still accessing it. Whether we're talking about Z Magazine, Mother Jones still had a viable voice. Harper's Magazine had was able to get some sort of artistic communication inside while still being a little bit of a boutique-y type of magazine. The Nation had, I would argue, greater viability. But then you also had the Village Voice, and you had the small remaining ring of alternative press still functioning. With the eradication of that, it is definitely true, as an artist, where is one supposed to go in order to have his or her work seen by the general public? You have now, the corporate model is such that you have to access these platforms if you want to make a living, because that's really part of that has to be one of the major parts of this discussion, because we've really eliminated the middle class. It doesn't really exist anymore. Where if you just look back, starting 40 years ago and previous to that, there was still something of a middle class where an artist could work at a coffee shop, could work at a bookstore, could make sandwiches for a certain portion of the day and still support him or herself and produce art and have that disseminated somehow into the culture. Now what we're left with, and this is why it's really terribly sad, there's very little encouraging advice that I can give to younger artists who want to communicate these ideas that I think are important, because they have to go, the only platforms that they can approach really in order to make a living are these corporate platforms. Now, a corporate platform, they don't see an audience members as people that you want to engage with and to bring into the conversation and have meaningful discourse about politics and culture. They see them as consumers. And so what do you do with consumers? What you do with consumers is that the consumer is always right. The model is to dumb down the content so you don't offend anybody, and by connection to that, advertisers. You get in this shitty situation where all of a sudden, one of the major things that you cannot say as an artist, and it's probably the most important thing that you need to say as a viable artist, is that corporations are bullshit. Capitalism has to be examined and seen for for the atrocities that it perpetuates. What corporation is going to allow that messaging in? None. So all of a sudden, you're trapped as an artist, and there's plenty of people that I know, because mind you, that the artistic voice and using art to produce commentary about life predates magazines and newspapers. We're always out there. We're always going to be communicating. Whether we're going to be seen by a large public that can then utilize the seriousness and power of this kind of conversation to actually exert social and political change is another thing. And that's really what we all should be talking about, in how to politicize the culture in a way that doesn't allow power to frame all of the conversations and establish the arenas wherein we can have these discussions. Because I think that's where we are right now. And that's why things suck so bad, because we're allowing power to frame the conversations. And you can't win if that's the case. You just absolutely can't win. So we've got to sort of muscle our way into a situation where we're able to communicate in a way that says, fuck the power. You know, they don't have our best interests at heart, because they're trying to protect this hierarchy that keeps them at the top. And they're making sure that capital and profit is flowing in one direction. Those are not the people who should be determining what moral conversations we should be having, or, you know, what is a respectable way to live. They're the worst people.
And I have a question about kind of maybe if, your artistic model, or, you know, how you go about doing things. Because looking through a lot of your cartoons, you know, especially like some of these things, you're dealing with these especially difficult topics, and in areas that you may not have, like, you know, some personal experience in, you know, but you're just taking an artistic, you know. And I don't know if Jason, if you can pull up the one that I sent you, that I was like, this is a good one. So it's the kid, and he's getting like a quote unquote present, but it's a coffin wrapped in the American flag. Right. And you know, like, you know, can't describe, you know, this, you know, paraphrasing the writing at the top, but yeah, here he goes. Giddy with excitement, Kevin couldn't wait until the day when he was old enough to become a hero himself and get a real one.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think he was like, so hey, I'm a Marine Corps vet, got buddies who died, who got the real one. But I wanted to bring this up because some of what you know, you mentioned it in the video, what you want cartoon, or what cartoons can be, is for people to actually reflect on what's going on. Because I see go you know, any Halloween store, and they've got these special forces get-ups, you know, they got all these military get-ups and all this stuff like that. And you know, that's the power brokers' vision of the military experience. And in my experience, you're hitting a little bit more the nail on the head. But to the point, or at least the question, how do you, I mean, is this something that you say, like, I'm going to, and especially too with some of your critiques on Barack Obama, you know, how do you decide to just plunge full forth and, I don't know, go for it?
Well, it's a great question, and this is something that I would like the Crüe to sort of to talk to me about, because there's if you talk about the artistic process, it probably parallels any kind of deliberation on serious matters, right? And when you're doing that, you're in a private space. Right? When you're figuring out what personal wisdom you want to curate for yourself, you're usually in a private space because you're trying to figure stuff out. And that's how an artist tends to create his or her work. You usually try to shut things out so you can really think seriously about something. Now, when you're in a private space and you're thinking about serious issues, you're not going to be distracted by decorum or politeness and all of these other techniques that power uses to shut down conversation, right? So you're serving the work, you're serving your ideas when you're in that space. And in order to have viability when you're creating it, you want to avoid bullshit, right? Say you want to write something that, and if you're, say this is like the 1800s, and you want to write or think about what human equality should look like, whether it's between, you know, black and white culture, or if it's between men and women, right? So, and if you have, you know, a wife, you have daughters, you have sisters that you engage with in life, it's pretty easy to sort of, if you're honest about it, to say, you know, this is not the lesser sex, right? And also, if you have the ability to engage with, if you're white and you're able to engage with Black people and have meaningful conversations outside of a structure that is determined by outside power, then you would also say, it's obvious. I'm talking about truths that are actually obvious, and they get skewed by power who reframe it and then turn it into bullshit. So you, as an artist, say even if you want to talk about war, let's talk about Mark Twain for a second. When he wrote the War Prayer and wanted to talk about what this means about, okay, we all gather in church and we're going to be very happy that we're sending our sons off to war. But really, what are we saying? We're saying, God, thank you for just, the situation. We're sending our sons off. Now we want you to destroy the other side. We want you to ravage the children of other people. We want you to tear their tongues out and throw them on the ground, right? So as an artist, Mark Twain was just like, okay, what you're really saying is this. So he writes that piece, and it's not a very long piece. He looks at it and he was just said, this cannot be seen in public. I have to publish this after I'm dead, because only dead men can tell the truth. What he's saying there, though, in a way, too, is that only artists can tell the truth, because they're engaging with the subject in a way that is allergic to bullshit. So if you look at what I try to do is, if I did this during the Iraq occupation and what was going on with the George W. Bush administration, anybody who has a heart and is going to be honest about the situation is going to be absolutely pissed off and really, really sad and angry about it. So as an artist, it's my responsibility to look at what's going on, go into this private space, figure out how to say, fuck George W. Bush, fuck the people who are his apologists, right? You have that. And then it's just like, all right, so how can I make this not as blatant as that, but still hold on to the emotional and the real vitriolic outrage that it requires, because it's serious. You want to wake people up, because when there's a fire, sometimes you yell fire, but a lot of times you just scream, fuck, right? Yeah. And so you don't want people to sort of say, all right, we shouldn't listen to this person because he's using, some obscene language, and that's inappropriate. So it's up to me to figure out where that line is. Where can I create a piece of art that can begin a difficult conversation that has irony in it and maybe a little bit of humor, dark humor for sure, but also is able to retain the outrage. And I think that that's the power of what satire, the most effective satire, can do, is that it can say that you're not alone in recognizing that the world is being controlled by madmen, and that you're in danger, and we are all in danger, but I'm going to leave you a little bit angry, because anger is the one thing that gets people into the streets, and anger is the one thing that gets people to remain politically active enough to want to actually change the system. You don't want to produce satire or humor that tells your physiology with a laugh that everything's going to be okay, because the onus is all of a sudden not on you. It's just like, all right, there's other people who are recognizing the villainy of the society. Use, for example, when Jon Stewart was at the Daily Show and considered the most trusted man in America when it came to news, right? And people were just like, wow, he's producing satire. Satire is very strong now. But the one thing that was different about the satire that he was producing, and other people who were very effective at it, was that Jon Stewart always left his punchlines with joy. There was some measure of relief in how keen he was to get the laugh. So when you left that show, you felt like, wow, I'm not alone. He's got 1 billion followers. He's saying exactly what I think, but he's ending it with a laugh. And so I'm being relieved that I feel less alone, but I'm not being politicized in a way that is organizing a movement that can actually stop the bullshit from continuing to gain power and to have a negative effect on our lives. So that's why it's a different kind of satire.
I do want to ask you this question. We got a super chat question in from Joanna, friend of show. Does Mr. Fish think Ben Garrison is effective for mobilizing the right?
I need a broader sort of effective in what way? You know, because there's ways to yes, you can be effective in mobilizing an emotional reaction, but then what do you do with that pressure cooker when it needs relief? Right? Which direction do you point that person into? You know, because it requires a deeper. Like, what's the secondary stage of that is what my question would be, because I don't know how to answer it otherwise, because a lot of mobilization and a lot of contemporary, there's no real organizing going on, I think, on the right.
You mean the mobilizing seems to be
you got to echo. You got to turn your volume down. You got to turn your volume.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. Let me work this out first.
Okay.
There's manipulation, but I don't know about, like, if we want to talk about organizing and mobilizing a group of people into action that considers the complication of how society is structured. You know, that's a secondary thing. But I
don't think that's the function of the right as a particular political faction. I think that the function of the right is to reify the existing infrastructures and hierarchies to protect the interests of both capital and the state in a way that regress in a way in which wealth calcifies upwards, and that the benefits and privileges that those who have traditionally benefited from that society, i.e. white males, are protected from any kind of democratization of that hierarchy. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the white does not organize. I think that their organizational capacity is easier because the reactionary nature of the social infrastructure of America overall. I think America is by definition a reactionary society. So it's easier for them to compel people to buy into that politics.
By preventing conversations. I mean, by preventing discussion.
Joanna did say, like, giving the right something to rally around and distract people from the actual struggle around material interests.
Right, exactly. I think we all know exactly what all this means, and I think that I think we're all correct in the sense of that. Now but similarly, we can't forget that the left can also do the same thing, and that's what my book is about. You know, that it's. And I just gave the example too of Jon Stewart. I think that there's ways that when we're talking about the left, I'm talking about, you know, liberal Democrats, because there is that question of just like there are radicalized people, but what kind of access are they given? You know, just as an example here, let me just throw this out just as an example. When it comes to protest. In contemporary times, what does that look like? Because I teach a couple courses at the University of Pennsylvania for the Annenberg School of Communication. I teach the history of satire and of art as commentary. So it has political cartooning, but it also has all different kinds of art that is just attempting to speak truth. So if we look at how protests are organized now, and I talk to the younger people in my classes about this. The expectation is, you get a permit. Okay, so you're asking for permission to go and talk about what is fucked up with the system, and you're asking the system to give you permission. This is largely what happens. Sometimes there's spontaneous situations, and sometimes there's other things that don't exactly follow this paradigm. But overall, the paradigm is get a permit. Figure out what the parameters of what the protests are going to look like. So you're going to be quarantined in a particular space. There's going to be a curfew when you can stop your protesting. All right, and it's also set up in a way that is, as long as it's not disruptive to commerce or traffic, then you are safe to do it. And that's the antithesis of what has to actually happen. Chris Hedges talks about it all the time, where we're at this stage where we have to break the law in order to protest effectively and do it peacefully, chain yourself to something. I think that that's one of the reasons why the Occupy Wall Street in its early stages was so effective and so infuriating to the power brokers, is because it was people congregating around what their own pain was about recognizing how shitty the system was. And if you remember, news sources and all the pundits were trying to figure out, they were just like, who is your leader? What are your bullet points? All of these things. And it was this frustration because it became a cultural movement. It had the possibility of becoming a cultural movement that politics can't control, because it actually functions outside of politics. It's a way to say that the only way to really affect a legitimate political and social change is actually allowing it to seep into all other areas of your life. Art, poetry, jokes, right? How we interact. And that's why I think there was so much momentum in the 1960s, was because it was about not looking at the right or the left, or even claiming that you were a member of the left. You were just saying, it's mom and dad, it's power. It's the winners and the losers. Kurt Vonnegut used that phrase quite a lot, particularly at that time. The losers have got to pose a revolution against the winners. Why are the winners there? They're controlling the dialogue, and they're making sure that they're princes and kings.
Interesting. The one thing I would digress with you about is the notion that liberal Democrats are the left. I would make a profound distinction from that reality. I don't think there's anything left about anything liberal at all. I think the whole function of Democrats, liberal or otherwise, is to confuse, obfuscate, and neutralize any kind of real left politics in this country.
Yeah, but I totally agree.
A question I want to ask you is that what exactly? I mean, this might sound trivial, but I think it's kind of relevant in this digital age, which is often trivial. What is the effect of meme culture had on your art and that particular means of, we could say, political or even pseudo-political expression in the digital age? And how has digital technology, social media in general, affected your ability to convey your message or politicize the type of messages you're trying to bring forth?
It's actually completely hobbled it. Because what memes do, and what all, I would say, contemporary, like modern technology does, which is where we get our information, is that it's trying to do. It's really about getting a reaction out of somebody who's looking at it. It's not about starting conversations. It's a reactionary staccato form of communication. And so when it comes to that kind of communication, when we're talking about issues that need deeper probing, there's really no platform where that can happen, right? So what we end up with, and you can see it exhibited in how little younger generations, and I don't want to turn this into a thing where I'm wagging my finger at, the younger kids these days, but there is a truth to, history now is becoming something that people just don't have any sense of. Because we have this technology now, we have Wikipedia. Why develop a deep knowledge of anything if you have the ability to have it immediately available to you on your phone, right? So why research anything? Maybe if it comes up, then we can get our phones out and just be like, all right, how long was Paul Lynde in the Center Square in Hollywood Squares, or something like that. But it's the same thing with political issues. People just don't know. Because now we're to the point where you can have somebody like Joe Biden and the right is calling him a Marxist. Yeah, where do you even start that conversation? And there's a lot of people who are afraid to even enter into the situation. They even said with Bernie, they were just like, he's a socialist. I mean, he was even calling himself a socialist. But what does that really mean? What does socialism really mean? People have now even equated democracy and capitalism. So therefore, you can't even say, capitalism is actually a danger to the species. People have so little understanding of that because all the conversations are so shallow, and the capitalism and democracy have been equated to they think you're saying that democracy is dangerous. So now you're in a situation, the same thing with Israel. One of the things as a cartoonist in the United States, it's very, very, very difficult, and it always has been for me, to render any complaint against the Israeli government, because all of a sudden you're seen as an anti-Semite, and it's because there is this inability to have people who have retained a sense of history, who know what you're talking about, when you say that the Palestinians are suffering and they should not continue to suffer. We should be doing something about that. Well, wait a minute, don't you? All of a sudden, it may even deteriorate into this conversation about, like, do you not even think the Holocaust happened? And as a professor, that's one of the things that I luckily get away with because of the title of my courses and the stuff that I engage with. But I know other professors who are just like, yeah, we can't dig deeply because everybody has a phone, and if they film me, I'll lose my job. Because nobody wants to have the clarifying conversation about what you mean, because it's just too controversial even to engage with that stuff. So we're in a situation, getting back to just the meme thing, where that just perpetuates this knee-jerk impatience that is being hard-boiled into the culture, to where it becomes the idea of doing a deeper dive or having a longer conversation on anything. The prospects of that are becoming more and more exhausting to people, because they're not used to having deeper conversations about things.
I kind of want to bring this back to since you're talking about largely American artists and American audiences, and the question then, and especially I'm like the person who's not from here, trying to be here. I have to ask myself pretty much every day, other than the fact that I write in English, and it seems like pretty much like the most reasonable thing for me to do is to be here. What is like a strategic advantage as a leftist artist in the United States to working in the United States, and also on the flip side, there's the question of like, how much can you really accomplish? What is the vision going to be, and what can you accomplish really, and what could be like an increment of like something that you have previously done before, that you feel like would be advancing the cause a little more while working in the United States in your work.
The thing about working in the United States with this kind of job that I do, we want to call it that, is just like we were saying at the beginning of the program. It's not a livelihood at all, and it becomes less and less. I'm less and less able to do it, and that's a lot of what the documentary is about. It examines really my fall from grace, and so all of a sudden my family is jeopardized because I can't make any money doing what I do. And luckily I've been doing it long enough to where there are little pockets and opportunities where I can continue to do it. And now I can teach. And so I can show a lot of this stuff and have these conversations. But the advantage is just like what we're doing today. It's really wonderful that I can have a conversation with you, because, and you must get this just doing all of the different kind of work that all you do. I constantly get emails with people who say, I'm so thankful that you're there. I'm so thankful that you're having these conversations, and because I'm not seeing it anywhere else. So really, we're really part of an underground, and we're part of an underground that the only real hope for, I would argue, even the planet at this point, if we're talking about the United States, and the only hope for humanity is making sure that the underground, yes, sometimes it can feel like preaching to the choir, but the choir needs practice, and the choir needs the ability to learn how to sing better and better and more beautifully to pull other people into the audience. And so that's what I feel that my responsibility is to continue doing that. And also internationally, I'm also pretty well known by virtue of the fact that they see me as one of the only American artists who is willing to essentially sacrifice everything in pursuit of disrupting the system and trying to speak truth as consistently and as constantly as I can. And that's also really meaningful to me. So I guess that's the answer for that.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm echoing.
Get an echo. Okay, we lost him. Wow.
No, we got it, Karthik. You got to kill that echo. So if you're recording it, you got to figure out what to do because it can't have it too much.
Fish, I wanted to ask you a question. As a matter of fact, as a political cartoonist who I used to read before he was televised, who I actually think his work was better and more radical when it was just in print media, that I'm wondering if you're familiar with and what your evaluation of his evolution is. Are you familiar with Aaron Magruder from the Boondocks? And
yeah.
I'd like to know what are your thoughts of him and his work from print to television or in general? I'm just curious. A lot of people are fans of his show, but I think he was much more radical when he was actually just in print media.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what I would say. I think that in print media, he was allowed. Remember, when it comes to print media, even with cartoons, there is a literary feel that is hard baked into it, because it is on paper, and you're reading it. And so whenever you engage with physical material like that, it is just enough work to sort of bring you at least partway into the experience, where digital technology and television and stuff, it's much more passive and you're just there to sort of react. But just getting back to, I can only assume that some of what we were talking about earlier is, played into Gruder's situation, which is we're going to give you a platform that is television. It's a different medium, and so there are different rules and expectations. So obviously the tone of it has to be made slightly more friendly for television. Now, the question then you have to have about that is the softer tone, I would argue, because again, like I said, it's a different medium and you can't do the deepest dive on it because it's not print. Is that still useful? Should we condemn him for making certain sacrifices? Or should we be thankful that there is still a sufficient presence of what it looks like and feels like inside the Black community, with characters that you can identify with and that are human, right? And he's broadening that story, and that narrative is now going in through television into other places where it probably wasn't going in print media, right? So what that sets up is you have people who just, if you look at it and you consider it as a line of commitment to potential change for the better for society, he's still on this line. And it's the same thing that I would argue about The Daily Show, where, yes, like I was saying before, it wasn't really satire that was mobilizing in a profound way people to actually do something, but at least it was giving them a certain amount of language that could feel safe in their mouth. They would recognize that the buffoonery of Congress, for example, is something that is true, and it's something that we should recognize. But is it bringing the end? No, but it has us at least on course. And those are the people that more radical artists and thinkers can invite into actual action. Because I don't know, let me just ask this question of you guys. Did anybody go to the rally that Jon Stewart had with Colbert to restore sanity, after, when was that, 2010 maybe? And it was in Washington, D.C. Did anybody attend that rally?
I did not.
Okay, I'll just say that one thing that was really interesting about that is that Glenn Beck, if you remember, Glenn Beck had just done something in Washington that was about restoring sort of American, freedom and all whatever bullshit thing it was. And a ton of people showed up. So in reaction to it, Jon Stewart wanted to have the rally to restore sanity to the country. So I went, and the attendance was massive. And there were people there with signs. And it had in the air, there was a feeling of activism and protest. Okay. That's not what he wanted to have in that situation. He wanted to do what he quite often does, which is just say, listen, I'm just a comedian. Let's all just get along. Let's not go crazy here. Let's just have fun. And that's what it turned into. The sadness that I felt standing in that group of people who had signs, who were just like, yeah, fuck the system. We really have got to we're here together. We're en masse now, which is in and of itself a political statement. We're seeing comrades that are actually physically around us. So this feels like something, okay, now I really don't feel alone. Because when you're watching The Daily Show, you're isolated in, everybody's quarantined into their own space. So that's not really a movement. That's not an organization. All of a sudden, they're in this space. And so Jon Stewart starts the show, and it becomes zany. And there's gigantic screens for people to see through to the back of the mall. And all of a sudden, inside of 15 minutes, the signs are down and people are watching, just staring at the monitor. It became television outside. And you felt all of a sudden the potential for a meaningful group activity that could have sort of perpetuated something after the fact, deflate into television outside. And then it was done. People sort of laughed, being like, oh, that was kind of funny. And his commentary was the same thing. And the only person who criticized him for it in a very vocal way was Bill Maher. It was just like, I was embarrassed. You missed at this opportunity to actually speak honestly to these people who wanted to be. If you want to make people not feel like they're crazy, tell them that their pain is real. Tell them that their outrage has now a place that can be applied in a usable way that would actually help advance the cause forward.
So the question, I think, even in these kind of circumstances, how much, to bring up another point that I think Pascal brought up before, which is that the right gets to, I think it might have been a question from the audience, that the right always gets to frame the cultural narrative in the United States.
Right.
And kind of like that seems to be the historical precedent. Now thinking back as well, and that's why Jon Stewart was such a big deal, because he came out to be this unabashed liberal, and there was something even daring and bold and courageous and all of that about it, and he became this champion, etc. So the model that at the end of the day seems to be that if you're an artist, and I do consider him to be a comedian, not a political commentator as such, even though he kind of skirts the line. So if he's a comedian, then he gets to do his act and nobody interrupts him. He's not canceled, and he gets that platform. And because he has that platform, suddenly he's effective, because he's able to deliver a message that would otherwise not be delivered. But I feel like at the end of the day, we're still going by the presumption that that message that's being allowed is effective at all. Are we hedging our bets here in thinking that that message actually has any consequence? Because it seems to just be, and again, to complete that thought, somebody else pointed out that somebody was doing, Ben Garrison is organizing for the right or something. I think the only organizing you do for a conservative is to make people sit down. And I think that that in that respect, maybe what the nature of even organizing via a character such as Jon Stewart might be doing, because at the end of the day, you're sitting down and watching him, and he's calming you down, he's soothing you, and all of the radicalism is kind of lost at the end of the day. And in a way, we miss the fact that he's not around to soothe us anymore.
Right.
And that seems to be the cultural narrative as well. So given these realities, again, can there be a radical Jon Stewart? It seems to me, or am I asking, is that an oxymoron?
There can't be a radicalized Jon Stewart with the platform that he had, because really at the end of the day, Jon Stewart is Viacom, and so you're not going to get that megaphone. One of the other people that I've really loved when it comes to comedians is Bill Hicks. And I don't know if you guys know who Bill Hicks is, but Bill Hicks was somebody who in the late 80s and early 90s was just kind of unpopular in the United States because of how honestly he spoke about politics and culture in the same way that Lenny Bruce did. But he was very big overseas. And you could see how his life played out. You know, he got cancer and died, but at the same time, his peers like, Seinfeld and Jay Leno and stuff who were doing the comedy clubs, they got deals because they were willing to sort of stick their heads as far up the ass of the corporate machine as possible because the rewards are enormous. So the question of can there be a voice for the sort of a radical truth-telling voice to hit as many, have an audience as large as Jon Stewart, that gets us back to that question of how do we reframe the information platforms that exist in this country? How do we break up these monopolies? Because the truth of the matter is that people, there's intellectual content to the stuff that we're talking about, but there's also a lot of emotional content to it. There's a lot of beauty in it. Because one of the things that radicalism, I would argue, tries to do is to remind people of their own beating hearts. And if you can get people to recognize that their life is precious outside of how it's determined, how its value is determined by economics or other of those scenarios, just as a human being, like what is the humanitarian experience of being alive? You remind them that they're worth protecting. So the danger, and this is where the power of real radicalism comes from, is if you can get enough people to recognize the fact that their lives are being severely dimmed and limited by power, they're going to be just like, wait a minute, once you wake somebody up to that fact, it's just like, wait a minute, I don't want to go back to sleep. I don't want to sleepwalk through all of this. I don't want to be pacified to the point where my mind and my passion is secondary and unimportant just so I can be a wage slave and just sort of and help power maintain its fucking hold on everything and determine what logic is. Because just look around. And this is one of the things that is potentially positive in where we are right now. The damage that is done by following the leader, it's starting to become unavoidable as far as proofs. Look at the environment, for example. Right? It's becoming less and less a viable conversation to be like, okay, now wait a minute. We should clean up the oceans. All right. The way do we clean up the oceans? Well, let's figure out the economic plan on how to make that happen. Because unless we can figure out how to do that in a way that is cost effective, it's going to be very hard to pull off. Listen, and that's how a lot of people engage with that issue. But look at it, that's not logic. That's allowing, again, we're back to allowing power to frame the conversation. And we don't feel like we can actually mobilize ourselves to the point where we can actually affect that kind of change, which is nonsense. We actually can, because there are examples through history where that has been the case. Just getting back to, it's May Day. Without the labor movement in this country, the protection for workers, time, safety, all of these things, that was a war that was happening in this country. There were people who were slaughtered, defenseless people who were slaughtered to advance that cause in a way that better garnered these protections for us and recognition of each other and the need, again, that we are precious and we deserve protection. So those kinds of movements need to be engendered again. And that's the question of just like, what is the tactic for that? Are people able to are they radicalized inside already? And it's just a matter of reawakening what is already embedded in them? Because part of me, quite often, I feel like that is more my mission. I don't feel like I'm giving something to to the general public that they don't already know about themselves. I'm trying to create a space where they recognize that they're already radical thinkers, that they know what beauty is, they know what aesthetics are, and they know that it's worth promoting and protecting in themselves and other people. So it's just a matter of waking people up, not giving them theories and ideologies that they can then glom onto. No, it's about elbowing that shit out of the way so that they can recognize that they are unique, precious, and worthy of saving. Because right now they're secondary in how the system is set up, and they're actually being used.
There's something that you mentioned there that makes me like think about, you know, especially too in the face of like the climate crisis. What is the reaction? What it should be the normal reaction to something that most people now recognize as like the existential crisis.
Right.
And it's as if like, you know, the movie Independence Day, they just like the scene where all the nations came together for like a joint strike base and the cost sharing agreement that hit the cutting room floor, you know, but it's just part of the process that's in our you know, like that's in our real life. And it's like, well, no, like the aliens are coming right now and you're talking about how are we going to pay for it?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I'd even extend, like, one thing that I always try to do too, if you look at my work, yes, I do some, you know, we've been looking at various images that have been popping up on the screen that are very opinionated and have a political bent to them. But I also try to do a lot of cartoons where they're nothing but jokes. Because that's its own radicalized expression. Because once you approach a joke, right? We all love jokes. Everybody loves to hear a good joke. Everybody loves to hear a good dirty joke, right? And a lot of these things are just because they're really inappropriate. A lot of humor comes out of just like, what would be the worst thing and most inappropriate thing to do or say right now? If you have that inside of context of art and jokes, then it's great. It's a great experience. And it's fun because people can understand the parameters of just like, wait a minute, life is not, you don't need to be so rigid with how you're interpreting things. Right. So where we end up with that kind of thinking, I know that everybody's going to have a different favorite color. I know that that's the case. I'm not trying to sort of like say that we should all be able to release this commonality that we have that is going to be so pervasive that it's going to be, you know, kumbaya every single day and everybody's going to be able to get along. No, there's going to be differences because everybody has a different sense of what values are. Right. But we can exist in such a way where we don't abstract each other and inflate these concepts to the point where we vilify each other and do something about it that is negative. Right. So if we just want to extend the analogy of favorite color, everybody has a different favorite color. But you having a different favorite color than me is not a judgment against my favorite color. And I shouldn't feel like I have to protect what I know in my heart, which is the most beautiful, amazing color is orange, say, and somebody's telling me that it's pink, that their favorite color is pink. I shouldn't be just like, wait a minute, wait, you're wrong about that. Because there are these things that are hard-boiled into us, right? If I asked you what your favorite color was, you sort of generally would know what that was. You know certainly what colors you hate. Is there any rationale with that? No. It's just there's various things that determine what our aesthetic appreciations are and so forth. And we do that also with different characters, you know, how we chemically relate with other people, right? But understanding that these are differences and not anything like my judgment against you if you have a different favorite color to me shouldn't mean anything. You know, it should just be a state of just like, okay, well, we have a different idea on what that aesthetic is. What we have to do is not allow those aesthetics to sort of like fall and into institutionalized ways of behavior or to be codified by people who are in power that all of a sudden make us feel paranoid about other people who will then attempt to rob us and take our identity and try to implant theirs upon us, right? It becomes very complicated. And ultimately, it becomes a question of what is, are we capable of even succeeding in that? Is this a question of the viability of human consciousness itself rather than what we think? Can we actually think our way out of this? Can we actually feel our way out of this? And those are philosophical questions that they're impossible to predict. The one thing that we have to do is we have to keep on trying. I know I said Chris Hedges earlier, and this is one of the things that he has said, you know, we do this stuff because we know that it's the right thing to do, not because we're going to win. You know, so we have to stay true to our hearts, and we have to stay true to the idea that we are all existing in the same place and have uniqueness that we have to protect in each other. And we should do that without surrendering our souls and hearts to other people who would have it a different way. Man, you're pulling up stuff that I haven't even seen in forever.
I actually want to address something you said about the importance of connecting a left project to the humanity of individuals and not getting bogged down with theoretical and ideological kind of platitudes and constraint.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, and we have a friend of the show who really kind of focuses his programming on left theory. Do you actually think the theoretical focus of so much on the left that you literally have to have an almost kind of like master's degree like political education before you understand what, you know, the surplus value of labor is an actual obstacle to effective left organizing, when, you know, instead of just appealing to the fact that, listen, your labor is getting robbed of you because you're not getting paid fair wages, and that basically the reason why your dollar is not going as far as it did 20 years ago is because of the way the economy is structured to rob it of its value, and life is getting worse because of that. Do you think that that's actually an obstacle, or do you think there's an in-between between the importance of theory and practical, actually human outreach? I'd like to hear your kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. I do think it can certainly be an obstacle, particularly when the culture becomes so not used to having longer conversations, like we were saying earlier. It becomes a way to shut down conversation. The same way that a lot of just any political conversation for many people is just it's too problematic, in the sense that I don't really have a political opinion because I'm not smart enough to. We all know sort of people like that, I'm sure. You know, there's people who, for example, found it a really frightening prospect to argue against Christopher Hitchens, for example, when he started to side with George W. Bush. Because he's so well read, he's so well spoken, he has a great sense of history. So a lot of people were just like, you know what? I'm going to look like a loser if I go against him in debate, because on this, he's going to look like he knows so much more than me. And my attempt to simplify the argument and make it about human beings is going to look like a fairy tale that has no application to it. And I would even say that that's one of the functions historically of good political cartooning, where quite often it is about getting rid of the surplus intellectual noise in order to look at the heart of the issue. And Pascal, to your point, sometimes it's just about, we really should start at the elemental level of this, to where it's just like, you're in danger because of this. Rather than like, let's approach this as let's talk about the theories of government and different social philosophies. And, you know, I'll even start to pull in, you know, Erich Fromm talking about, did you ever read Erich Fromm's Sane Society? Well, Kierkegaard said about, you know, that kind of thing is going to make people feel ignorant. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to do that, because it's not, when it comes down to it, I mean, quite honestly, even if we're talking about political activism or if we're talking about art, at the heart of all of this stuff, it's not really that complicated. It really isn't. Because what we're talking about, if we can just reduce the equation to a family, right? And this gets us into basic anarchistic thinking. The idea is, if you can recognize every member of your tribe, of your family, of your group, what is innate about how you behave with these people? Is your instinct with your children, for example, is not to feed yourself first, it's to feed your children. And whatever is left is what you're going to do. So there's these things as organisms that are hard-boiled in to help perpetuate our survival, right? So if you can understand what your gifts and what your tendencies are inside of this group, the anarchistic model says that there are going to be some people who are much more driven to be the hunters. There are other people who are going to be the gatherers. And all of that is going to work out in a natural way to help perpetuate the continuation of the group. What happens when you populate and the tribe or the group becomes, the family becomes so extended that in order to understand it, you have to start creating these circles of abstractions, further abstractions. All right. And then in order to feel like you are connected to this ever-growing expanse of human beings, you start to say, all right, well, so wait a minute. I can relate to, all of the white people now inside of this. Those are my family, right? I can now relate to people who speak the same language as me. That becomes this family. And then you start to cordon yourself off into these abstract places where it's just like, all right, so we've got to stick together because what makes us special and unique, even if it's just like the color of our skin or anything like that, which is completely arbitrary, but still we'll embrace it because that visually, and we recognize that right away, we now have to protect ourselves from the other, who is obviously exhibiting an alternative. And when it comes to sort of alternatives, you become in a dangerous situation because, as history says, the people who are going to take over an area are the people who are going to be the most brutal, the people who have the biggest guns, the people who are not going to feel bad about slaughtering your family. So now we need defense, so we need all of these things that all of a sudden remove us from recognizing the family and our anarchistic tendencies to actually want to perpetuate survival into these cordoned off subsections of paranoia and potential outrage.
Do you consider yourself an anarchist?
Inside of my mind, I absolutely do. It becomes problematic because of all of what we've been talking about. There's different strategies on how you have to communicate and how you have to engage with dialogue. So conceptually, it's how I most relate to the world. But in practice, as you know, you have to figure out different strategies and different compromises that you make and how you communicate. But being creating the kind of art that I do, one of my missions is to point out why everything is fucked up and why I'm so uncomfortable that I even have to communicate in certain ways. Like one example I'll give that I was actually going to give for an earlier point that we were talking about. I've only self-censored one cartoon in my entire career. Everything that you have access to on the internet and on my site and so forth is just me expounding on something. It's out. If it turns out to be the sort of the wrong thing and I feel ashamed about it later, listen, I want to give everybody the same grace that I want them to give me, which is the right to be wrong sometimes and to not be shamed and shut down with wrongness, right? We need to be much more open about everything. The one cartoon that I self-censored was because it was right in the middle, right at the beginning of the Trump administration, after all of the mass shootings that were going on, the school shootings. And if you remember the conversation, there would be the mass shooting, and then the Republicans en masse would say, we are praying for the survivals, we're praying for the people that we lost, so forth. And then after a few days, it would be like, okay, we have to protect our Second Amendment rights. The NRA is something. And as these shootings kept happening, the distance and time started to become less and less, to where all of a sudden there was a mass shooting. And then by the end of the day, it was just like, we need, the left is going to try to take your guns away from you now. Don't let them. And I was just like, Jesus Christ, this is becoming more and more repulsive. So the drawing that I did, and it took me about 7 hours to do, and I think it might actually be in the new book, if I remember correctly, it's Donald Trump with a red, white, and blue gun, and he's filleting it. It's in his mouth. I drew it in such a way where you didn't see that there was a trigger on the finger. It's red, white, and blue. It's a little larger. I had spittle, or whatever you want to imagine, drooling out of his mouth as he was filleting the gun, which is filleting the violence culture in the NRA and the Second Amendment lunatics, because that's what it looked like to me. Rather than sort of recognize what's going on, he's going to continue to sort of fillet this group. So I looked at it, and just like I was saying earlier, I create this stuff, and it's just like all of my outrage and it looked like it was like a Rembrandt. It was like rendered with such beauty and attention. But then I sent it to some of my colleagues in academia who study First Amendment rights and so forth. And I said, well, what do you think about this? There's something inside my stomach that says I probably shouldn't post this far and wide. And he talked to some colleagues, and he was just like, you know what, I wouldn't do it. And the reason I wouldn't do it is because if you do it, the FBI is going to be at your door the next day. And it's going to be a disruptive situation, and it might be really detrimental to you. Now, if you were living alone and you didn't have a family, that's another thing. But you have a family, and you want to weigh out the catastrophic possibilities of that kind of disruption. So I self-censored it. I didn't put it out. What I did instead was I published it with a giant black bar over the gun going into the mouth. And I explained why this needed to be self-censored and why I didn't feel safe in a country that talks constantly about the power of free speech and the First Amendment. And isn't this a shame that I am so motivated to self-censor? This is an example of something that is terribly wrong about the culture, and something that we should be panicking about, because it affects all speech, not just extreme speech.
Do you think somebody else would have published it? Oh my God! I'm so sorry.
To answer your question, I just loved it. It's all, it's the voice of God all of a sudden. It probably could have been published outside of the United States, to answer your question. Yeah. But now things are different. I mean, I got sued. I don't know if there's one cartoon that I did that continues to get a lot of momentum because the problem it addresses never goes away. I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know how quickly it can be pulled up. It's called Through a Looking Glass Darkly. And what it is, it's a reworking of a Norman Rockwell, who was the illustrator for the Saturday Evening Post, who produced real Americana, cherry-cheeked, Christian-looking, beautiful illustrations. And so he did one that was called Triple Self-Portrait. And it's where he's looking in a mirror, see the back of his head, see his face forward, and you see him drawing himself on a canvas. So it's triple self-portrait. So I reworked that to where it's somebody who has a Klan hood on, is looking at themselves in the mirror. So you see the Klan hood from the front, Klan hood from the back, but what is being drawn is Captain America. And so that one, it's people keep discovering it and then telling me, wow, Mr. Fish, your finger is on the pulse. This is so perfect. And I'm like, you're looking at a cartoon that is like 15 years old. The fact that it keeps gaining that thing, like, wow, you're really, oh, there it is. Where this keeps seeming like it's super appropriate for right now is kind of disgusting and kind of upsetting, right? So when this was reintroduced, when Trump was elected, the people who control the rights to this image are in Indiana. They're in Pence country. So I immediately got contacted by lawyers who threatened to take everything that I owned unless I make sure this is nowhere to be found on the internet. So I got the ACLU involved. They were very excited because they wanted this to turn into a national trial, where we talk about protecting satire and protecting voices that try to communicate this kind of criticism. And for about 2 months, it was going right up to the wire, where the lawyers were just like, we're going to absolutely destroy your life. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. The ACLU was just like, oh, you want to do this. And so my family was just like, my wife was just like, well, it's your call. So it's an important issue. So do it if you want to do it. And of course they dropped it because there still remains some protection of this satirical voice in this kind of criticism. And so I was saved by not caving. And maybe that argument could have been made for the gun in the mouth, but I was not. This was when the fabric of society really felt like it was coming undone. And I just made that call for myself. And I still question whether it was the right thing to do or not, but it was an interesting experiment that I just went public with, like I said, with the black box over it and saying, this is a demonstration that there are canaries dying in this coal mine, and this is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Hey, silence is a bad thing. And so is Karthik's echo. So that's why you're on mute.
I feel like Karthik, if Karthik has Bluetooth headphones that can be plugged in, Bluetooth headphones can really fuck with these things. But either way,
yes.
I think we've gotten that point.
Well, Rich, I wanted to ask you: are you a fan of Bakunin? Being that you are, as an anarchist, I have a few good anarchist comrades, and I find that the intellectual arguments are actually kind of mind expanding, and I find them quite interesting, particularly about the coercive nature of the state. Can you have a state that is not coercive? The notion of workers' council, self-management, and self-governance. Right. A lot of people, feel, when you talk to, I hate to use the term, normies about anarchism, they're like, oh, does that mean society goes wild? And many people don't know that there's actually a very significant and a long intellectual tradition of scholarship and social organization based on anarchist theory. And it's not just like we all live in the forest nude running around and getting, berries or whatnot. Right. Anarchism does not mean lack of structure. It means lack of hierarchy and lack of subservience to the state. And, we try to be non-sectarian here at This Is Revolution. So I want you to feel that that takes you out of our political or ideological camp in terms of understanding. But I want to shout out some of my anarchist homeboys who put me onto Bakunin and a few other of their theories as well.
Yeah. And it's part of, again, I think that in order to have like a really a thorough conversation is that you do have to bring in social philosophers and artists and all of these different voices, because everybody's got their own kind of expertise. And again, that's part of the sort of the anarchistic model. These are things that sort of are innate inside of us, right? So the whole idea, it's about not allowing externalities to determine what your fate is against your better angels, the voice that we all have in our heads. And the innate attachment that we have to our own existence. Because really, when it comes down to it, ultimately, we all are having a unique experience with our own existence. Things are secondary to that, right? So how can we communicate with that? How can we learn from just the experiential, I want to say experiential experience, but that sounds kind of cheesy, of just what it means to just be alive, right? Because there is a real danger that can come from trying to reduce your comprehension of what it means to be alive into text or into even ideas and concepts. For example, if you go to the Grand Canyon or something like that, and it's sundown, and you're standing there, and all of a sudden you're overwhelmed with this feeling of recognizing something profound, right? There is a knowingness that you're experiencing right there. And it's a nonverbal knowingness, right? And so there's this centering that can happen. And we've all, even outside of that, I'm sure that we've all had episodes in our day where all of a sudden everything feels perfect. And your mood, your emotional state is in sync with your intellect, and everything is moving in such a way where it's just like, I'm resonating at a frequency where everything feels right and everything feels perfect. And if you get back to the idea of the Grand Canyon, and it's also aesthetically transcendental right now for me. There's just something that is beautiful and gratifying and centering. My being is at one with itself. Right? Now, the surest way to destroy that is to try to explain to yourself why that is, or also to try to figure out a way to break that down into steps wherein people can enjoy the same thing. They can, right? You're looking at something beautiful. So your understanding of it, do you want to try to understand it by saying, okay, the chemistry of the, atmosphere is such, or maybe this is extra beautiful because we've been polluting the air so long that we've increased the, the range of possible color with our pollution. I guess that's a good thing because I'm having a transcendental moment because it's extra pretty. All of those things all of a sudden reduce the experience into something that is cold and dead and happening here rather than just here. The mission, I always feel like, is to try to get these two things to have some symbiotic comprehension of what it means to be alive, outside of politics, outside of everything, outside of strategy. And just like getting back to what Pascal said earlier, just like finding that elemental thing. What is the thing? Let's work backwards from the most simplistic levels, because there is actually an argument in anarchistic thinking about like returning to a much more simple way of life that actually allows us to not be dangerous to others and the environment. Because there is an argument to be made that 10,000 years ago, when we figured out how to farm, that was the beginning of our downfall, because that was the beginning of being able to control our environment to the detriment of other living organisms and ultimately to ourselves, because we come from the environment. So learning how to exist outside of it and to quarantine ourselves away from it makes us not as keenly connected with all of the cues that the environment tells us that we're doing to it. Right? Do we need to see a seagull walking around with just like a tampon applicator sticking up of its ass and like a condom on its head to be like, we should do something about pollution? There's other things. There's some other things that are much more subtle and much more and just true that we should be able to actually recognize before it's too late, because we're in those spaces now to where it's just like, can we even fix this? There's a certain amount of freaking plastic that exists inside of our bodies now. And so it's not just a matter of willing ourselves to be healthy and willing ourselves to actually saving ourselves and the planet. There's a lot of hard work to do, and it may be for naught is the other reality about that.
Check. Am I echoing? Okay, good. Thank you. So I wanted to ask you, after that, how do you ensure that given that you're working against a shape-shifting neoliberal oppressor, a system, and that's notorious for stealing revolutionary ideas and using it against revolutionary actors? And if they can't do that, then they'll kill them. But given that that's like the circumstances where, an artist is working, how do you ensure that like the message is indeed subversive, and like not in some way because it's being permitted? Is the permission of the message kind of in a way denying its like subversiveness?
Yes. Yeah. So it is a matter of, just back to that, the point of, it's a matter of trying to figure out how to reinvigorate artistic spaces and have people come to them. And this is outside of technology, just to make that point again. I think that one of the real important things is to figure out how to be in each other's actual presence so that it's real. Because if we're talking about, we were talking about comedians earlier, and I'll just mention Lenny Bruce. At one time, if you were going to go see Lenny Bruce, you had to actually go to a physical place and hear Lenny Bruce criticize power. He will get arrested. You are also maybe in danger of also being implicated with the criminality of somebody who's trying to speak truth to power, right? So that's a political decision that you're making to go into this physical space and participate in that. It's a congregation, right? And it becomes true. Community comes true when you actually have them in front of you, right? Human beings need that. So we actually need to have places where we can congregate that are actually where the arguments are being framed by the artistic mind much more than the sanctified, powerful framing kind, to where you know that it's safe to engage with those things. Just for an example, this is an example that I just love to give, because the Book of Mormon, have any of you guys seen the show, Book of Mormon?
I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
I've not seen the show, but I did do a tour with a bunch of Mormons once.
Oh, okay. All right. So just one thing about that show, which is really interesting. All right. So it's the South Park guys, right? So they've created this musical, and now it's playing in theaters. It's hugely popular. I saw it when I got free tickets from my neighbor. My wife and I went, and it was a matinee, right? So this is 2:00. And I had heard that it was fun, and just really edgy and just like a great time. So I go, my wife and I are the youngest people by like 20 years in the entire auditorium, right? So everybody is there. It's nothing but white heads all around us. The show starts, and it's definitely from the South Park guys. The big musical number right before intermission was, the refrain was "fuck God." Fuck God and the cunt was even one of the lines, right? And it's on stage, it's just going, big production number. It ends, and I'm surrounded again by these women in cameos and just with little sweaters, just like it ends, and they're just like, oh, that's just so wonderful. That's just so wonderful. And the reason that is possible is because moving into an artistic space, you understand you're moving into a laboratory of ideas. Right. So you know that it's not somebody standing on a street corner with a megaphone just screaming, fuck God and the cunt, and stuff like that. You all of a sudden understand that this is a place of make-believe. And this is a place where your internal conversation that you're having with the information that's being portrayed in front of you, you're safe. It's non-lethal. So then you can test out the question of, why is this obscene? Is this obscene because it's truly obscene? Is there such a thing as true obscenity outside of physical violence? Are there such things as thought crimes? The answer is no to all of these questions, right? So you need to be practiced in that, to where it's just like, oh, this is outside of the artistic arena, would be considered an obscene word or an obscene idea. But it's not really in this safe space. Just like if you were home alone, you're not going to be able to offend yourself by screaming motherfucker or something over and over again. You can't do it. But when you're out in public, you understand that people have a reflexive reaction to where it becomes a physical thing, where it's just like, oh my gosh, that's really offensive. But then you start to understand that there are offensive philosophies that are embedded inside of the society that need equal access to being aired in a way where the general public can say, wait a minute, that's not really obscene. Just to go back to what we were saying earlier, at one time, it was an obscene idea to go into the public square and that say that women should have equal rights. We should not be allowed to own another human being. There were penalties if you went into the town square and started shouting that. Right? So you kept it to yourself. But inside of art, all of these things they usually trickle into these spaces where people start to sort of embed it in poetry, in theater, in writing, in visual art, to where it's just like, no, wait a minute, Third Class Carriage by Daumier, for example, is showing us in the 1800s what it looks like from the other side of a public transport in France. I'm not looking at all the fucking people that Renoir says are, with their top hats and isn't high society a wonderful thing. I'm looking at the people there's a woman who's breastfeeding a baby and sitting next to an old woman who's got a haggard face. These are people who are suffering in order to support the other side, which all the other artists and the impressionists are saying, oh, isn't this wonderful? And this is what art is. No, you need to sort of like flip the carriage around so people can say, if you just go back to the basic Jesus notion of just like, hey, guess what? The meek are not pieces of shit. That is a radical idea. People who say that, guess what? Oh, I guess we should crucify them because that's a dangerous idea to present to the public, because what that says is that the meek are not pieces of shit. They are human beings. Oh, wait a minute. They look like the people in power. The people are in power because we're all pretending that that's where they belong. Wait a minute. Let's have a revolution because that's bullshit. We don't want to live in a place that is just being governed by bullshit. you have to silence those voices that try to make it an equal playing field and that is obvious. Now, again, now we're back to who is going to do that and how are we going to get that into the mind of the public. And traditionally, the most effective way is through the artistic, uncensored mind, and it being utilized by public organizers who are bringing in a different kind of light and a different kind of observation, which is going to engender change for other people who really want that too. And then you create this fabric where there's all of these people using their different talents and their different abilities to communicate a very similar message, which is that we should be humanitarian above all else. Stop sanctioning things into these different social and political philosophies, and then saying rigidly adhering to them.
I have a question I wanted to ask.
Sorry, if you can go ahead. Sorry, you go ahead. Sorry.
Pascal, ask a question.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the fact that the left escaping into academia in the 45 some years has created this kind of class-tiered, kind of intellectual top-down view of left discourse and politics, particularly in the West and America? Doesn't that demonstrate, particularly with the neoliberalization of the university, a shortcoming of the left praxis or its ability to even reach the working class?
Yes, I think that you're 100% right. It's a great observation. There's a couple ways to think about that. Very similar to all other areas of life, the left in academia, by and large, still will support power. Again, because then we're back to the discussion of the winners and the losers, and the haves and the have-nots. In order to protect your tenured position, you're going to support power, right? In the meantime, you're also going to be able to have deeper conversations and use historical examples of previous people who were radical and people who were challenging the system. But since it's just a story you're telling in academia, and this is how you're going to achieve a particular grade, or isn't this fun to have these conversations in a safe environment, that kind of thing. It's just where it's going to reside. Right, the right tends not to want to have large-scale conversations about history and culture and how it works, right? But ultimately, how you frame that to in a classroom setting, that's where the difference is, because there are some examples occasionally of academics who are radicalized and continue to be. Noam Chomsky just being one of the main guys when it comes to that. And he even said, I interviewed him for another book that I did. And it was a really interesting conversation because I asked a very similar question to him, which was, we were talking about, I think we started by talking about like 1970s television, for example, and a show like All in the Family. Or some, groundbreaking TV programming like that. I'm like, what happened to that kind of voice being permitted to exist in mainstream venues? And he said, well, they've always had problems, and I guess it's not really there, because he doesn't really know art so much. And I said, but what, like somebody like me who's trying to get my voice in remained in an artistic setting out to people who are trying to sort of, usually people have like a shitty day of work or school. And what do to sort of remind themselves that life is worth living? They go to the arts. They go to something that is just going to be like, all right, I don't want to think about the seriousness. And that's where I want to get people, right? So I said, what happens when that is removed from society? How can you affect change? And he actually said, do talks. Be a professor and do talks. And he's like, I'm scheduled for the next 5 years. And what you do, you can talk to your class, but you can also go and talk to organizations, and I'm like, if that's the best that we have, then we're sort of doomed. It doesn't really, it's not enough it's not enough to affect the change that we need. And nobody, it's not like all of a sudden enough academics are going to see that as a viable path to take, and then all of a sudden there are like 40 or 50 Noam Chomskys around? No. People know that just like Noam Chomsky's been doing it for a while, and they can just say, okay, I either agree with Noam Chomsky or I don't, and fuck it, who cares? But just to my point earlier, we need all different kinds of voices, and we also need that artistic voice, and we need to protect those platforms.
I have kind of a technology question, or at least technology and art. NFTs, the non-fungible,
what
was it, trademark or whatever the hell? I don't know. What do you think? What's your take on NFTs?
It's a really interesting thing because it's there is like that runs through that world, because I know some people who engage in that world. There is, and whether or not it's something that they tell themselves in order to feel like they're doing something that's not ultimately the wrong thing to be doing, they say there's a certain radical feeling about it where it's just like, fuck the system. We're now going to create our own. We're gonna sculpt our own rules to what currency looks like and how, you know, this kind of capital should be exchanged. Okay. The alternative nature of that, yes, I can see as a radical move, but really what it is, to my mind, it certainly from the outside looks like, all right, we're going to remove ourselves from the established kingdom. We're going to create our own little kingdom here that is still being controlled by ideas of a kind of capital and value being determined by abstract ideas about just the commodity. It's a different kind of commodification. Ultimately, is that, you know, how can that really be a radical idea? Because still, ultimately, it doesn't have human beings at its center. It's just a different kind of commodification. And I've given this analogy and this example before. Let's talk about value systems just for a second, because this was something that I thought of a few years ago, and it still seems to, it seems true to me, and I still have yet somebody say that it's a crazy idea, and it's a very simple idea to me. All right, if we consider different value systems, all right, if you consider capital, you have an accumulative value system, right? Which means that it's the less you have, the less value, the more you have, the more value. So it runs like this. It's up and down. A cumulative value system. Human beings, one would argue, can be determined by an intrinsic value system, right? It is a thing. We simply just are. We just, like organisms of matter and soul, heart, intrinsic value system, right? So now you have these two value systems. Now, when these two value systems meet, and you have the accumulative value system, there's always going to be a scenario where the accumulative value system of capital is going to be, inside of an argument, be able to demonstrate a greater value over the intrinsic value of human beings, which do not go up and down. They go side to side like this, which I think is exactly where we are, because when it comes to how corporations and how people who become apologists for the corporations that they work for continue to work for them, is because there's a justification that says, all right, just like I was saying earlier, should we save ourselves as a species? Only if we can justify it economically. So now you've got a situation like this. So now there's always going to be this argument where capital is going to be able to supersede the human experience. And that, again, that might be a question of the fallibility of human consciousness. Is that a function of how our brains work rather than our ability to think differently? That's a whole nother show that we could have. But it is a scenario that we definitely have to address. And so when it comes to the NFT and Bitcoin and all of that world that's creating as a subculture, to my mind, it's just an alternative version of the commodification of things rather than the need to eradicate those kinds of philosophies so that we can get back to allowing the intrinsic value of human beings to actually supersede the concepts of value that we keep concocting to make us secondary.
That was a lot deeper than I thought it was going to go.
You've been giving people too much stuff to ponder, Fish. It's just, there's so much silence whenever you speak.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, when something zooms by you, it takes a minute to like, was that a car? Was that a rocket ship? You know, what exactly just happened there? You know, and then like it catches up. I mean,
listen, I think we forget.
Right, going.
We've been going for an hour 45.
Oh, jeez.
We stole Dwayne for longer than I think I initially told him we would be on the show. So do you want to ask one last question, Karthik?
Yeah. How do you ensure that anything new that you're coming up with as an alternative to the system, I saw a bunch of comments also that said NFTs are like the Elizabeth Holmes of this thing, and it seems like the conception here is that ultimately it's going to be the next pyramid scheme, or like whatever we come up with is going to be be its own version of trickle down, and anything revolutionary it needs to kind of cut through all of that. And as an artist, what would be, as in we're all thinking about we're all coming up with our own ways, but how do you ensure that you don't fall into that trap of like being, or is that trap inevitable that like it very well could be? And I mean, even the grassroots thing, for example, like in the beginning, grassroots was such an emboldening word, like a solidarity building word, but then eventually it got co-opted and thrown back, and like everybody's grassroots now. AstroTurf campaigns are like basically running left, right, and center. So, how in these kind of bleak circumstances, how do you ensure that I mean, I saw the Obama picture also. How do you ensure that you continue to be optimistic, and especially how do you avoid the trap of like the next bubble?
Well, to my mind, I think the best tactic is to avoid falling into a system of thought and then using that system of thought to explain everything. Meaning that the way I tend to try to live my life is I look for deliberate ways to disrupt myself, right? Because there is a way to fall into the inability to recognize that you're in a trap. It's the whole crabs in the water, turning it up slowly. I don't use complacency as a indicator that I've arrived at a safe place and a gratifying place. I've developed this reflex to question my own comfort and question my self-congratulatory feeling of like, wow, that cartoon, man, nobody could say it as well as me. I try. I don't numbers. I just don't. And it's funny because that's why I was saying at the beginning of the program, which is I really genuinely forget. I do my best to forget about every piece that I do it after I do it. And I'm pretty successful at it. I've had people write to me and say that they love this cartoon and they want me to explain it further to them. I will have forgotten drawing it, and sometimes I'm not even 100% sure what I was trying to do with it. So I'll have to call my brother. My older brother is a scholar of my work for some reason, and he'll explain it to me so I can explain it to somebody else. So my technique is always trying to be present-centered and being in the moment, because unless you do that, you can fall into this trap of what the system really wants you to do. The system is there to sort of remove you from existing in the moment where you can see that there are things to panic about, right? Driving down the highway and seeing pipes there for a pipeline that is being put in. This happened to me in California quite a bit. If I was driving like in the desert or something, I'd be driving and then I would just see, I would see oil derricks, or I would see construction that was going on and just be like, oh, isn't the sun nice? And I would find myself just going by these things where all it would take is a moment to just be like, the earth is being carved into for the betterment of profit for some company that I don't know what the fuck they're even selling. Anything that has to move through the ground in gigantic, tunneling scenarios, it's usually not a good thing. So art is there to sort of pull us into the moment, because otherwise what we're doing is we're reflecting on something that has happened, or we're preparing for something that is coming. And if you're locked into a situation where you're working for the man and you're locked into a capitalistic system of rewards and penalties, what you're doing is you're thinking about, okay, I did that. Now, in order to move my piece to the next square in a way that doesn't jeopardize my trajectory of my career, what should I be thinking about? What should I be preparing for? It's just like when you go to a job interview. That's the perfect scenario to me. I tell my students this all the time. You're going to graduate, and I know that many of you have been inside of the scenario of interviewing for a job. Have you ever told the truth in those situations? And they laugh because they know that they know. You don't. There's penalties for telling the truth. So what do? In many ways, you just say, yes, I will surrender my heart and soul to this company because I really like what the company is doing. Those kinds of words coming out of one's mouth, one should panic about that. So the technique is to just like try to avoid situations, or try to avoid feeling like you have no other alternative except to sell your soul. Because the pressure to sell your soul is eventually going to grind you down, the majority of people, to the point where they will sell their souls. And then they will live their lives without recognizing that they're living a life. They will retire. And the pattern is they will retire. They will be, in their 60s or 70s. And they will say, and I've heard this by this generation, when you get that old, which is, fuck, I wasted my entire life. I forgot that I should have been a priority in truth-telling and connection to other human beings and to my experience of life. I sacrificed it because that's how the world is set up. Always question how the world is set up and do your best to exist contrary to it in a way that is joyful and nurturing and inspirational to other people. Engage with everybody as if they are your friend.
Well, all right. All right. Mr. Fish.
Is Pascal, are you echoing now? Is that
me?
No.
No, it was Karthik, and I totally muted him. Oh, you can't even. His echo is so powerful, you can't just mute him. You have to literally erase him from the screen.
Poor Karthik.
Here I am,
the old school headphones. That's
you got it. You young people want to be all modern.
I don't. Not me. Couldn't be me.
Oh.
I'm sitting here with a FireWire interface, just being so 2012.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is.
Fish, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. I'm very, very pleased to have you on the show. This is the one time I actually, when doing the show, just kind of found hella images and put them up because I wanted people to know why I'm a huge fan of what you do, and I actually love the fact that you work with Chris Hedges.
Yeah,
I am very jealous when I see him write a piece and then your artwork is there. It's like those two things go together so well. It tells the story so well. It illustrates the point so well. So
yeah,
if you could pass that along to Brother Hedges, tell him that I love that shit.
Yep, you got it.
I appreciate that. Anybody have any parting words for this gentleman?
Thank you for coming on, brother.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's really great, and yeah, onward, camaraderie for everybody. Let's keep it up.
And I put buy links in everywhere this is streaming for Mr. Fish's latest book, Nobody Left. You can
Which I had to get it. I had to, like, I don't know, order. You like wait for the order. There's still, I guess you're super popular guy, critiques capitalism, but has sold out book. Curious, very curious.
That's why I wear a jacket. Look at this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my Patreon people that help me pay for my jackets, to be honest with you. I haven't gotten a dime from my books, I don't think.
Oh, that's whack. We were also hurt because, you know, sometimes we don't have time to wait for something to ship. And so, oh, you can't get it digitally. Uh-oh. Pascal's about to get Karthiked. There you go. Yes.
Which actually I had a question. You know, was that on purpose? Do you have no digital copies because, you know, was that like a thing?
No,
the publisher doesn't.
There's some of the publishers tend to be like that. I think there's maybe a couple of my books are available in digital form, but I guess nobody left is not.
No, man, no.
Yeah.
But no, thank you so much for this. This was huge for me. I'm hella giddy when it came, and I was even. So, thank you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Thanks for the great conversation.
Oh no!
All right,
and we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you back at some point.
I'm around.
All right, you said nothing but a word, man.
All right.
All right, peace, Fish.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was Dwayne, Mr. Fish Booth. That was pretty dope, man. Shout out to David that hooked that whole thing up. One of the people that watched the show kind of hooked this whole show up. So I love when that shit happens. I love when that shit happens.
Great conversation.
Oh, hold on, Karthik, you want to talk?
Oh,
sorry, that was just me being an asshole.
Oh no, I completely. I felt like a fool. I'm really sorry about that. I thought the headphones will help. Honestly, it was a complete. I guess like I should have known that the headphones are worse than better.
No, like that is like, I don't know. This technology shit for me. It's too much. It's too much. So
yeah. It's kind of funny. There's a conversation in the chat now about what is a FireWire plug, which is funny.
I don't even know what that is.
Good. Don't worry about it. It's past you. Don't worry. It's old. Don't.
Hey, I wanna ask a question of the group, maybe the chat. Anybody reading anything interesting right now? I just got in the mail. I'm kind of psyched. Old school book, What the Negro Wants. Well, Rayford W. Logan. It's a companion.
Every time you talk about that, all I hear is that song "What a Girl Wants" by Christina Aguilera. But what a Negro wants,
what a Negro needs.
Anyway, it's a compendium of essays with W. Du Bois, Charles S. Wesley, Roy Wilkins, A. Philip Randolph, William Townsend, a whole list of Black thinkers from the 1940s. And what's interesting is that you don't hear or see white supremacy or racism very often. What you hear is labor, jobs, employment, economic security, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a fascinating contrast to the way in which Black political thought has evolved to today. But I'm going through it now. I just got it today, and I'm reading through it, checking out through the essays. Pretty interesting old school read.
I am actually finishing up The End of Policing
by Alex Vitale, which is a free book on the Haymarket site or
Verso.
Verso. It's free on Verso, and Alex Vitale was one of the first big guests on the show. I hit him up at a time when nobody talked to him.
Well, yeah, and that's that's what we're going through. On our Sunday streams, we do readings. A lot of times it like has to do with theory, but his that's got a great a very huge volume of wealth that has to deal with policing in very good synthesized chunks. And it's one of those books that builds upon its knowledge and all those things. But yeah, whether dealing with some of how racism is shown through in policing, incarceration, schools, 1033 program, all the things that, kind of buzzwords that does a great job of kind of laying it all out for this is what it is. And what I like about it along the way, it gives tidbits of information of how people can engage their local governments to actually make change, right? So if like having certain police officers that respond to certain things not have weapons, right? Or just police, or decriminalizing certain things, whether it's drugs or just homelessness in your communities. So that way police aren't the people responding to it. It does a pretty good job of that as well.
That's actually a big issue, is the whole criminalization of homelessness, especially in places like LA. That's what's going on right now. I think we might have talked about it last week, or we do so many shows together.
We talk about it pretty often, I think.
but that's actually one of the issues that's happening with the bill that got passed in LA. That was like, we're going to house all the homeless people. So a lot of people that weren't following it were like, oh, this is awesome. House them. Yay, they get housing. But what it was a way to round them up and say, look, if you don't go to this fucking shelter, whatever temporary shit we have for you, we're throwing you in jail and we're throwing away your shit. So a lot of the activists actually pushed back on it. So we're actually having a woman that actually wrote the article that the judge cited in that case to kind of put a hold on it next week. So that's going to be a good show. I'm excited for that show. And sorry we couldn't have Angela on today. She was having some issues.
Oh, Karthik, what are you reading?
Hopefully a technical manual.
Oh, damn.
Sorry.
No, that was yeah. I waited for a second to so I am I'm starting to read a book called The Last Man Takes LSD, Foucault and the End of Revolution. And it was written by these two scholars, Daniel Zamora and Mitchell Dean, who are, I think, Denmark-based. I'm not exact. I think one is Belgian and one is in Denmark or something. And I came across that article first in Jacobin, where it was an interview, and I think it was republished from somewhere or something like that, and it was translated by Seth Ackerman or something. And the book is about the time in 1968 when Foucault apparently went to California and took acid. And from there, he had an experience which enabled him, or like which propelled him to rework his history of sexuality, history and sexuality, or history of sexuality, I forget, through the lens of the individual, through an individualistic perspective. And that's kind of like the authors are presenting this experience to be the neoliberalization of Foucault, and in a kind of way framing his practices of freedom as like a kind of I don't know if the O is for me, but like, yeah, that framing his practices of freedom as a kind of limitation. It's not exactly like the individual never gets to be free in a true sense, unlike how he's saying it. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm reading about how that experience changed supposedly Foucault, and what we can probably learn about ourselves through the process. In like, and I saw this brought up a bunch of times today, and how like capitalism frames our own thinking itself as artists, and like how I've been trying to get out of these kind of systemic things that we consider to be aspects of humanity, but they're actually not. They're aspects of dehumanization. This year's like Oscars were a great example of. I think I saw a tweet where like Nomadland won the Oscars, but homeless people were swept aside. So the station, so that they can be presented with that award. So in such a paradigm, what does it mean to be a free individual even? So, and I think that like, if by taking Foucault down that pedestal would be a nice way to do it, then that'd be great.
Yeah, I wrote an essay, and I definitely covered that whole thing, that the street near where the step and repeat is, where the walkthrough is, they did a big clear out before the Oscars, and the movie that won, that's supposed to be about homelessness, they literally cleared out all the homeless, and they were real fucked up about it too. Well, I guess they've never been a really polite way to be like, can you please get your shit?
Yeah, exactly.
Go on through there.
Now that we've pushed you here onto the streets, can you you know.
I think that was a great essay, though. I think definitely much needed. I feel like more people should read that essay. In case I would definitely shout that essay out on your show.
Oh,
I would
thank
say,
you.
yeah.
Well, because I'm on a show with a published writer who's working on a very anticipated book. So if I write, yeah, I'm talking about you bastard. So if I ever write something, it's kind of like I feel like I have to do that, because it's one thing to have thoughts, and we're always working them out on this show, but you have to always write this shit down and have a concise ideology. So I think writing helps me with that, and that's why I think Pascal is so like precise when he talks, because he's been writing for so many years. So
thank you for the compliment, Comrade Jason. I'm just looking at all the books I still got to read, man. It's just like,
you know what I'm looking at? I'm looking at this.
So
I can't hear it. If it's loud, I'm sorry. I can't hear anything.
Play the English version so people hear the lyrics.
I don't even know what version I'm playing, because Adolf sent us like 15 versions.
It's the musical version.
Is it like 5 hours long?
No, it's not that long. You get the English version. I can think of it. The international, it's a great song.
Who's it? I can't remember. It was like the UK dude had sung a good version of it, I guess, and gotten to put on his own little chorus or his own, I don't know, section of the song where you're allowed to add in. Jason, what's that called?
I don't know. What are you talking about?
Not the chorus, but the verse. You got to add a verse to it.
Oh,
yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
You're amazing, Marcus. You're amazing.
I'm sorry, my bad, man. These sometimes words escape me. I'm old mind. In a young broken body.
English version.
Oh, this is the English version? Okay. Well, I figured out how to play. I was trying to do something, because there's this device that we were looking at earlier today that would make the show a little bit, it would up the production value. And I was trying to find a very hood way to do it, because I'm working on a budget here. And the hood way just causes me to play music apparently at a very loud level. So
this week on This Is Revolution, we'll be having Milton Almaty, a discussion on Africa, the scramble for Africa in the 21st century. That will be on May 6th. I believe that is Thursday.
And Tuesday, we're going to have a music discussion. Me, Conan Neutron, and a few other people. But if you're a longtime listener to the show, that you will have known, but they're just friends of mine from the industry. And we're going to be taking a look at music in the world during COVID and post-COVID. What is it going to look like? What is live music going to look like in the post-COVID world? And it looks very bleak. It's going to be a very sad.
It's like NFTs.
Well, actually, one of the guys on this that's coming on did a whole NFT thing for an album. And jokingly, in an off-air conversation for this music project that I was working on, that it got totally paused because it really fucked up. I think I was telling you about it, Marcus. Jokingly, as I didn't erase it, but my girl had walked in, and I was like, if I did this as an NFT, I probably would make so much money because of what it is and what the content is. And she kind of looked at me. She goes, "Why don't you do it?" So I played it. And she was like, "Oh yeah, that you would go to hell if you release this."
Yeah, I'll be sitting out the music show. I'll let these hard rock guys sit around and talk, so I'll pass on that one.
It'll be Pascalis. He's also working on his book, so
yeah,
I want everybody to send Pascal positive.
I have the chapter outlines. I'm going to be doing finishing the introduction. I'm trying to propose it to publishers. Hopefully, we get a contract. We shall see. We shall see.
I do want to say Tuesday.
I agree, Andrew. More people would have. I agree. Even, and I know you're probably like tongue in cheek, but I agree with you. If I would have hit you up for an image, I never feel comfortable asking people for shit. So now I will ask him if he asks for shit. And
was that the one that he did the? Was it the DMX? He did the DMX
Andrew did all the images for Ben Burgess, and he did the cover for Michael Brooks's book.
Oh damn! Okay, cool. I mean, I saw that. I was like, this brother can draw. That's good shit.
That's Andrew. Yeah.
But I didn't want to say. So we're having a bleed over Karthik. Well, I'm coming on Karthik's podcast Monday.
Okay.
And then Tuesday, Karthik is going to be coming on, which I hope is okay. You know, like new developments with your family, understand. But I did want to talk about how the nerds are killing us. Some of like the denial of spreading, you know, like the ISP for the vaccines, sharing of resources, you know, but also going into a little bit of the Bitcoin and how much resources it's utilizing. So I got some stuff that I'll be able to send you guys, but you know, the four of us will be back again soon, and hopefully the echo does not come back.
Well, that's what I'm going to be known for, I feel like.
Look, man, there's worse things you could be known for. There's so many more worse
Yeah, I was
things.
going to say, yeah. Thank God for that.
If you have not checked out the show we did last night with Vijay Prashad on anti-imperialism, it was fire.
So usually, just to let people know, we have days that we do the show, right? Tuesday we do the live stream, Thursday we do the live stream, and now we do Saturday. And Saturday did start out as a bit of like, yeah, let's do this thing, and now it's become a regular thing. And Vijay Prashad couldn't do it on Tuesday or Thursday, and I just didn't want to try to push it because there's another person I really wanted to have on the show, and things got pushed to now it's like I'm waiting till August to try to work something out. So the moment he said a date he could do, I was like, let's just do a special show. I knew the turnout for the show wasn't going to be as big as we had hoped, but the show loved it. VJ came with us for the after hours segment. So if you guys are patrons, you can see that after hours segment with VJ where he was taking shots to people. It was it was fire. It was fun. I'm super excited. VJ yeah, VJ accepted super chats. So we've had some pretty funny shows. Definitely, there's a lot of people making fun of me, Karthik. If it makes you feel any better, I fucked up the other day and created a whole country of brown people called Iraqistan.
By the way, ABL thank you for the thank you for the compliment for saying I stick to my guns no matter who comes on, whether it's Norm or VJ. I try to stay consistent, brother. I try to stay consistent.
He's just hard-headed. It's fine.
Oh man, whatever.
Well, you know what the thing is too is like you said, we were on a cast stream with already published author, right? Respected. So like there's a certain platform that Pascal gets to punch from that none of the rest of us do.
Yeah, man. Karthik is published as well, my man.
Not a full-length book though.
Yeah, like when we were on with Norm, Karthik wasn't there. That's what I was saying though, is like I think I feel intimidated by, he was like, oh hey, call me Norm. Don't call me no, we're cool. And it's just like, nah, I don't feel like we're just on the same playing field. And even when I was trying to say like, hey Norm, maybe take it easy on some of the language thing, I was honestly speaking like to like a fucking my old boss or some shit.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like if you've written a full length book, then you've basically proven that you can sustain that level of intellectual output. And I think that like if you have like pieces here and there published, I mean, other than the fact that that's kind of what capitalism has allowed you to put out there, there's also the aspect that you can only be like trusted with like 10 words at once, and Pascal on the other hand can be trusted with pretty much everything that he says because he has put in the work and proven it, and that's kind of what like the machine itself runs on, right? Except that that's not necessarily true for most people. They can be really immature even when they're pretty crazily well educated, and there's like a whole sphere on the conservative right that's like like that, and but on the other hand there is some truth to it as well, like that if you've proven that you can write a full book, then that means that you are in a way more coherent and put together than someone who gets a poem here and there.
Look, man, we're all excited for Pascal's book, and I don't want to talk too much about it. But Tuesday worked out. Tuesday worked out real good because I was like, "Look, man, you're not coming on the show Tuesday. You're gonna get the thing done, and then we can get a cover worked up soon. Zero's gonna get the cover worked up, and then when we start promoting that, everybody's gonna get excited. Then you'll get excited, and everybody wins.
Pascal hates this. He's like, stop saying nice shit.
This is how I tickle him. Since I'm not in Miami, this is how I tickle him if I was in Miami.
Yeah, man. No. Shout out to the comrades and all on the May Day today. Man, we had a long show last night. I think we did our thing. I think we should wrap it up.
You can't hear a damn thing. You can't hear anything.
I can't hear you, man.
This is why you can't fucking do the ghetto version of like fucking trying to actually get the device that makes this shit easy. I was trying to be cool about it because so we gotta get the device.
It's called Volume Master for plugin for Google.
If people saw the setup that I have right now, they'd be like, "Oh, okay." Because another thing I want to do, and Pascal looked at me, he's like, "I don't know, man." Is I'm trying to set up where we can have like calls for patrons. For the patron half, we can have call-in part.
You do that with Discord.
We can talk about that on a production hour, but we can wrap this up for now.
People excited. All right, yeah, we were up late last night. All right, thank you guys. We're gonna leave with Mr. Fish on Chris Hedges' show, and we will be out. Thank you, moderator John, and have a good Saturday, guys.
Just the people that you named grew up in this time where that curiosity was demonstrated and engaged with in all the different arts, and so that's so much of the book is about the loss of the artistic community as a truth seeker and a truth teller.
I want to ask about figures like Zinn or Kurt Vonnegut or Norman Mailer. These were combat veterans. These were people who had experienced war and knew how venal and murderous and sordid violence is. And I don't think that's accidental. So yes, they were important radical voices in the 60s and the 70s, but they were kind of forged in the crucible of World War II. How important do you think that was?
I think it was, it's funny that you go to that time period because it's obvious given the examples that you just gave, but it's been true throughout history. If you look at the work of Goya, if you look at the writing of Mark Twain, if you just consider something like the War Prayer that Mark Twain wrote, he was not going to publish that while he was alive because he said it told the truth too blatantly. So in many ways, when it comes to discussions of something as grotesque as warfare, there's a parallel with, it might as well be blatant sexuality. There's a certain obscenity parallel to these two things. And again, I'll just go back to where do you engage with this subject? You engage in the arts. Because as demonstrated by, as you said, like Norman Mailer, The Naked and the Dead, and pieces like that. If you just look at the history of literature, there's been a number of obscenity trials that have tried to quiet the voices of different authors. If you just like the Tropic of Cancer, the Ulysses, Lady Chatterley's Lover, all of these things which are not supposed to be appropriate for polite conversation. The same thing with war. And you know this better than most people, everybody that I speak to, because you've seen it firsthand, and you recognize the fact that it is not anything that you can use to get people to enlist with vigor, because it's an ugly obscenity.
Well, I would also say that it thrusts you into an existential crisis so that you come back from even World War II and you recognize the lie that every institution, the church, the government, the media, the entertainment world has perpetuated, and it creates, certainly I speak out of personal experience, a kind of alienation because the wider society wants to imbibe the lie and doesn't really want to hear the truth. And that's certainly Vonnegut and Mailer and Zinn, who was a bomber pilot in World War II.
Right, and Norman Lear as well. You know, when you consider, because the scenario that you just created, as you just spoke about, says that power has framed the debate, right? And so as long as you allow power to frame the debate, there's this hierarchy that is assumed. And as I said at the beginning, when it comes to the artistic voice is there to ask all of those questions and all the difficult questions, because it's in pursuit of honesty and in pursuit of these human connections that make us feel like, A, we're not alone, and also that we're connected to reality. Because when a veteran comes back from war, I'm sure that the trauma is that they were duped. This was a hell. They were forced to go into hell. And what do you do when you are put onto the battlefield and you're forced to engage in hell? The only way to survive fire like that is if you behave like a demon. It's the only thing that you can do. Now, if that becomes your survival mechanism on the battlefield, and then you are taken off of the battlefield and put back into civilian life, all of a sudden, it must be true that you recognize this ability to abandon your humanity in order to survive in hell, and now you're not in hell anymore. What are you? What do you do with that? So the arts were always there to say, to give you a space to expose this pain, this sorrow, this sadness, because
so
it's only
the rise of this movement that you write, these figures that you interview and that you write about, came during the height of the Vietnam War, which I don't think was accidental.
Right.
And to what extent did war create the cultural space? And then we'll talk about what happened afterwards. But I was a boy. My father was a World War II veteran. He'd been in North Africa, but very involved in the anti-war movement. So I was a kid, but I was being dragged off to these protests. And I wonder how important that